2 German Shepherd puppies, one white as frost, one golden like the last light before dusk, lay pressed against their mother's still body on the edge of an empty highway. Their cries were small, but they carried farther than anyone should hear. Miles away, a Navy SEAL named Noah Grant drove through the rain, chasing silence he could never catch. His radio was off, his heart the same. He wasn't looking to save anyone. But when that broken sound reached him through the storm, he stopped. What he found on that road would change the way he heard the world forever. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. The afternoon light in the Cascade foothills was fading into a pale metallic gray, the kind that pressed down on everything it touched. Rain whispered against the pine needles, and the mountain road curved endlessly through a landscape that seemed to have forgotten what color was. Noah Grant drove alone, his hands tight on the wheel of a black pickup, the dashboard humming with the low rhythm of the engine. The windows were rolled up, sealing him in. No radio, no music, not even the wind. Just the mechanical heart of the truck and the steady breathing of a man who hated sound. Noah was 42, his body still carrying the discipline of the Navy SEALs. Straight-backed, measured, composed, but his face showed what the years had taken. A thin scar sliced through his right eyebrow, and faint lines gathered around gray-blue eyes that seemed to stare at something far behind the present moment. His beard was trimmed, but uneven, dark at the jaw, and lighter where stress had turned it silver. He had the quiet strength of a man who'd been trained to endure pain, and the haunted restraint of someone who'd seen too much of it. He'd been discharged 5 years ago after an explosion in 2012 left him half deaf and more than half lost. Mason, his closest teammate, had died in that blast. A mistake born from Noah's hesitation, 1 second too long before giving the order to retreat. The sound of that detonation never really stopped. It just buried itself deeper. He could still feel it when he closed his eyes. The vibration through bone, the light swallowing the horizon. Mason's last shout, drowned in thunder. Since then, Noah lived inside a kind of silence that wasn't peace, but punishment. The hum in his right ear began again, low and dull. He rubbed the side of his head, muttering to himself, "Not tonight." It didn't matter. The hum never obeyed. It came and went like weather, and tonight it carried something restless. He pressed harder on the accelerator. The road narrowed, winding between wet evergreens. He didn't know where he was going. He never did anymore. He just drove until the tank warned him to stop. Motion was the only thing that quieted the memory. The air inside the cab was dense with the smell of rain and old coffee. The wipers dragged across the glass in uneven intervals, creating a squeal that sent a ripple of irritation down his spine. He turned them off. Better to see through rain than to hear that sound again. Noah glanced at the passenger seat. A folded tarp, a thermos, a half-read book he hadn't touched in months. The same company he'd kept since leaving the service. Things that didn't talk back. He'd grown used to silence, even addicted to it. But tonight, the silence felt strange, like something was pressing against it from the outside. He slowed the truck. At first, he thought it was the hum in his ear acting up again. But then he realized, no, it was coming from beyond the glass. Faint, erratic. Not wind, not thunder. Something smaller. A broken rhythm, like a sob that had learned to bark. Noah frowned. He turned off the defroster, then the engine, letting the truck settle into a heavy stillness. The world outside was soaked and still. He listened. Nothing. Just rain hitting the hood, the slow tick of the cooling motor. Then again, that sound. It came from somewhere ahead, across the bend in the road. Weak, fragmented, but unmistakably alive. He should have driven on. Animals died in the mountains all the time. Coyotes, deer, strays. Nature had its order, and he'd long since stopped interfering. He didn't want another sound to follow him home, another thing to remember. But this noise, it wasn't wild. It wasn't the shriek of pain or fear. It was smaller, softer, desperate. Noah's hand hovered over the ignition, then fell away. He reached for his flashlight on the dashboard and stepped out into the rain. The cold hit him immediately, a clean slap to the face. Water soaked his hair, his jacket, his jeans within seconds. The forest around him was gray and endless, the air thick with mist and pine sap. He walked along the shoulder, boots squelching in the mud. His flashlight beam trembled with each step, cutting through the rain in uneven slices. The sound grew a little clearer, short, pleading bursts echoing off the slick asphalt. When he reached the bend, the beam caught movement. A shape, large, low, motionless, sprawled across the edge of the road. Beside it, two smaller shadows moved, twitching, pressing against it. He took a few steps closer, and the image sharpened. A German shepherd lying on her side, fur slicked down by rain, her flank rising only barely. Two pups, one pale, almost white, the other golden black, huddled against her, tiny bodies trembling. Noah stopped breathing. The mother dog was injured, her hind leg bent unnaturally, her fur tangled with mud and blood. Her eyes, half open, reflected the light, not wild, not empty, but exhausted. One of the pups tried to nudge her muzzle, emitting a sound halfway between a cry and a cough. The other whimpered, pressing into her chest as if trying to keep her heart beating by touch alone. Noah crouched down slowly, the beam of light steady in his hand. "Hey," he said softly. His voice cracked. He barely recognized it. The dogs didn't move, except the smaller one, the white pup, which lifted its head, eyes cloudy with fear. Its body trembled so hard it nearly fell over. It barked once, thin and hoarse, and then again. Noah felt something twist inside him. The sound was so small, and yet it cut through the years like shrapnel. It was the same pitch, the same sharp note that had rung through his comms headset right before the blast. Mason's voice had started as a warning too, faint, broken, drowned by static. He shook his head, forcing the thought away. "Not tonight," he muttered again. He looked at the mother dog. She was still breathing, but barely. The pups were too young to survive long in this cold. The logical part of him said there was nothing he could do here. He wasn't a medic. He wasn't anyone's savior anymore. But the noise, that fragile, stubborn sound, came again. It wasn't a scream. It was insistence. He stood there for a long moment, letting the rain drum against his shoulders. The flashlight beam catching drops like sparks. Then he sighed, long and heavy. The kind of sigh that belongs to a man tired of losing arguments with himself. Noah turned back toward the truck. He walked slowly, feeling every step like a decision he couldn't undo. He climbed inside, water dripping from his hair onto the steering wheel. His reflection stared back from the windshield, a man who'd promised himself he'd never stop for anyone again. His hand went to the key. The hum in his ear returned, low and rhythmic. The world outside was still, almost too still. He twisted the key, and the engine went silent. For a heartbeat, there was nothing. The air hung heavy, rain hissing softly against metal. Noah sat there, hands motionless, head bowed, caught in the weight of his own stillness. And then, through that silence, faint but undeniable, came the sound again. A bark. Small, broken, persistent. Noah opened his eyes. The noise didn't stop. It kept calling, steady and unafraid of the quiet it lived inside. He exhaled once, slow and uncertain. The silence around him felt heavier than ever. But somewhere in it, something alive refused to give up. Rain kept falling in thin, endless threads, each drop catching the light from the truck's headlamps and shattering into silver dust on the slick asphalt. Noah stood by the open door, his breath visible in the cold air. The sound that had drawn him from the truck came again, quieter now. Not a bark, but a whimper, a tremor of pain disguised as a cry for help. He turned his head toward the sound and saw what he had only glimpsed before. The shape sprawled on the road was not debris, not a shadow. It was a German shepherd, and beside her, two small lumps of fur barely moving. He took one step forward, then another. Each splash of his boots against the water echoed in his skull, too loud, too sharp. His hearing had never been the same since the explosion. Now, every noise felt multiplied. The patter of rain, the hiss of wind, even his heartbeat. All of it pressing against his nerves. He flinched at his own footsteps. For a second, he thought about turning back. He could get in the truck, close the door, drive until dawn. The world didn't need him to stop anymore. He wasn't trained for rescues now. He was just a man trying to stay numb. But the whimper came again, soft, trembling, and too human in its rhythm to ignore. He approached slowly. The mother dog lay half on the road, half in the drainage ditch. Her fur was a mess of tan and black, matted with blood and mud. Her breathing was shallow, her body twitching every few seconds as if caught between sleep and shock. The left side of her body bore scratches, likely from the impact of a passing car that never stopped. The pups pressed themselves to her stomach, trembling from cold more than fear. The white one had fur so pale it reflected the truck's light, its ears still folded, eyes barely open. The darker one, golden with black streaks on its back, lifted its head briefly as Noah knelt down, watching him with wide, uncertain eyes. Noah crouched beside them, water soaking into his jeans. He hesitated to reach out. The mother's eyes flickered open, amber, sharp even in exhaustion. She didn't growl, only exhaled, a sound somewhere between warning and surrender. "You're still fighting," he murmured. His voice startled him. It sounded too soft, too alive. The white pup let out a weak cry and crawled toward him, paws slipping on the wet ground. It pressed its nose against his boot, sniffed once, and whimpered. Noah froze. The warmth of that tiny body, barely more than a handful of fur, seeped through the soaked leather. He had forgotten what living warmth felt like. Behind him, a set of headlights approached from the curve, distant but bright. A car, maybe someone who could help. He stood quickly and waved his flashlight. The car slowed but didn't stop. It veered to the opposite lane and sped past, tires slicing water into his face. In the glare, he caught a glimpse of the driver, a woman in her 60s, glasses, lips tight in fear. She never looked back. The sound of the tires faded into the rain. Noah turned back to the dogs. The world was quiet again, except for the steady drip of water from his jacket. He crouched lower, the flashlight trembling in his hand. He wasn't sure what to do. He'd never been afraid of wounds or blood. He'd seen enough of both to forget their weight. But this was different. These creatures had no language for pain, no plea he could answer with orders or bandages. They had only that sound, that small, breaking cry that wouldn't stop. He reached for the pups. The golden one recoiled slightly, a faint growl rumbling in its throat. The white one stayed where it was, head pressed against his boot. Noah picked it up carefully. It was lighter than he expected, ribs sharp under the thin fur. Its tiny heart hammered against his palm like a trapped bird. He held it closer to his chest, his jacket shielding it from the rain. "You're all right," he whispered, unsure if it was true. He glanced at the mother again. She blinked slowly, pupils dilating under the beam of light. Her ears twitched weakly. The darker pup returned to her side, nudging her muzzle, trying to rouse her. Noah watched that small act, the insistence of a child trying to call back the world, and felt something tighten in his chest. He remembered the day of the blast, Mason trapped under debris, reaching for him, eyes wide with disbelief, refusing to stop breathing even as fire spread behind him. Noah had dragged him halfway out before the second wave hit. Mason's last words were drowned in noise. The memory struck so sharply, he almost dropped the pup. He took a step back, chest rising fast. "Not again," he muttered. "Not this." The wind shifted, carrying a new smell. Blood, diesel, rain. The hum in his right ear grew louder. He pressed his hand to it, trying to steady the ringing. The pup in his arm whimpered softly. He turned toward the truck, wanting to leave, to escape before the world demanded something from him again. The road glistened like a wound, long and wet, stretching into darkness. He told himself it was mercy to go. The dogs would fade quietly. Nature would take them faster than he could save them. He reached the truck door, opened it halfway, and then it came. A sound so sharp, it pierced the night cleanly. The white pup, still in his arms, barked, a single, high, sudden note that sliced straight through his damaged ear. Pain shot through his skull. He dropped to one knee, clutching the side of his head. The bark echoed, bounced against the hills, disappeared, then came again, softer but relentless. Noah stayed there, rain beating down, heart pounding. The sound hurt, yes, but beneath the pain was something else. The bark wasn't fear. It was command. It was life, insisting on being heard. He lowered his hand from his ear. The pup in his arms stopped barking, only looked up at him. Small, soaked, shaking. Noah met its eyes. For a moment, the world aligned. His pulse, the hum, the rain, all following the same rhythm. He realized he couldn't walk away. The mother dog was still breathing. The golden pup was still waiting beside her. And the sound, that stubborn, piercing cry, would haunt him louder than any explosion if he ignored it. Noah stood, clutching the pup close, his jaw tight. He looked down the road one last time, then back at the bodies on the asphalt. The world seemed to hold its breath. He exhaled, stepped forward, and let the rain swallow his shadow. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time Noah stood again. The sound of it was softer now, a dull hiss brushing across the pavement like a whisper he couldn't quite catch. He looked down at his hands. Mud, blood, and fur clung to his fingers. The white puppy trembled against his chest, its small body shaking so hard that he could feel each rapid heartbeat through his wet jacket. The darker pup still stayed beside its mother, nudging at her neck, trying to make her move. The mother's breathing was faint but present. Her fur rose and fell in uneven rhythm, her eyes half open, dull but watchful. Noah knelt again, setting the white pup next to its sibling. "You're not gone yet," he said, his voice a hoarse rasp. The sound startled him. It had been months, maybe more than a year, since he had spoken aloud for anyone but himself. In the seals, words had been commands, short and precise. In civilian life, they had become unnecessary. He hadn't realized how foreign his own voice had become until he heard it again in the dark. The mother's gaze followed him. There was no trust in it, no understanding, only exhaustion and instinct. Yet when he leaned closer, she didn't growl. Her body was too weak to fight, but something deeper held her still. Noah raised a hand, slowly, palm open. "I won't hurt you," he said, barely more than a breath. The darker puppy barked once, a small, pitiful sound that cracked the night. He glanced toward it. The bark echoed strangely in his half-hearing, bouncing around in the damaged side of his skull. It reminded him of something he'd buried deep, a shout through static, the crackle of a failing radio, Mason's voice calling through chaos. Orders mean nothing if you can't save anyone. The memory hit hard. He could almost feel the desert heat again, the smell of burning metal, the dust cloud rising as he yelled back through the headset. Too late, always too late. Mason's scream dissolved into white noise, and then the silence after the blast. Noah squeezed his eyes shut. The guilt lived inside him like a pulse that never stopped. He opened them again to the sight of the 3 fragile lives clinging to breath at his feet. He pulled off his jacket and laid it over the dogs, tucking the edges close around their shivering bodies. The rain beaded on the surface, sliding away. The cold bit at his arms, but he ignored it. The mother shifted slightly under the weight, her paw twitching. Noah's throat tightened. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're all right." A car engine roared in the distance, then faded as it turned another direction. No one else would be coming. The mountain road was too far from town, too late for help. It was just him and them, the living and the almost lost. He looked back at his truck. The headlights still cut through the mist, beams trembling against the dark like twin ghosts. Inside, it was warm, dry, safe, or at least quieter than the storm. For a moment, he considered taking only the pups. The mother might not survive the trip. He could rationalize it easily. She was too injured. He wasn't equipped. He could save at least 2. But when he turned toward her again, she was staring straight at him. There was something human in that look. Not pleading, not fear, but recognition. As if she had seen the same kind of giving up in herself that he'd been living with for years. Noah exhaled slowly, a sound between a sigh and surrender. "All right," he whispered. "All of you." He slid his arms beneath the mother dog, one under her chest, one under her hindquarters. She was heavier than he expected, limp but solid, the kind of weight that pulled on every muscle and memory he still carried. His breath came out ragged as he lifted. The white puppy squealed softly, startled, while the darker one trotted anxiously at his heels. The movement stirred something in him, a rhythm that felt eerily like command and obedience again, the old order of purpose and duty, though this mission had no name. When he reached the truck, he opened the back door and laid the mother dog gently on the seat. The pups climbed up beside her without hesitation. She let out a low sound, almost a sigh, and closed her eyes. Noah stood there for a moment, rain dripping off his chin. He could smell wet fur and iron. The hum in his ear grew louder, filling the space with static. He rubbed the side of his head, muttering, Not now. But within the noise, he thought he heard it again. Mason's voice, faint and warped by memory. You still hear it, don't you? That sound before everything ends. Noah swallowed hard and climbed into the driver's seat. His hands trembled on the steering wheel. He started the engine, but didn't move yet. The headlights illuminated the rain ahead, making the road glisten like molten glass. The world outside was both alive and dead at once. He looked at the rearview mirror. 3 shapes moved faintly. The mother's head lifting, the pups settling against her side. The sight filled him with something strange, something uncomfortable. Not peace, but an ache that came from remembering how it felt to be responsible for another life. He hadn't felt that in a long time. The thought terrified him. He turned off the engine again, listening. The sound of rain thickened, washing the air clean. His heartbeat thudded against the steering wheel. The dogs were quiet now, their breathing steady. The world had gone still, waiting. He could drive away, leave the truck running, doors open, let chance decide. But he knew the truth before he even finished the thought. If he left now, the silence that followed would devour him whole. He leaned his head back against the seat, eyes closed. The rain hit the windshield in uneven beats, like Morse code tapping against memory. He whispered, "I won't hear it again," though he knew he would. Every time he tried to sleep, every time the world went quiet. Finally, he started the engine once more. The headlights caught the rain, scattering light across the road like shards of glass. He shifted into gear, the truck rumbling to life. "I'm not doing this for you," he said under his breath, as if speaking to the ghosts sitting beside him. "I just can't take the quiet anymore." The mother stirred in the back seat. The pups whimpered softly. He didn't look back. The road ahead curved into the fog, disappearing. He followed it, one hand on the wheel, the other pressed against his ear as if to muffle the world. Behind him, the rain drowned the sound of everything he was trying to forget. But beneath that, faint, persistent, was the rhythm of 3 living creatures breathing in unison. And for the first time in years, Noah drove toward something other than silence. The mountain road stretched silent behind him, a ribbon of wet black winding through dark pines. Noah parked the truck beside a slope where the trees leaned like weary soldiers, branches slick with rain. He turned off the headlights, letting darkness take back the forest. The rain had turned fine, almost mist, soft enough to see through, heavy enough to feel. The engine ticked as it cooled, and in the back seat, the faint sounds of breathing and whimpering filled the small space. Runa, the German Shepherd mother, lay curled beneath Noah's jacket, her fur soaked, but her chest moving steadily now. The 2 pups, the pale one and the darker golden black, pressed against her stomach, tiny bodies seeking warmth that barely existed. Noah stepped out of the truck. His boots sank into the mud, the sound sharp in the hush of the woods. He looked up at the sky. Low clouds, no stars, and then at the empty road that disappeared into fog. He didn't want to go home. The house waiting for him down in the valley was just walls and silence. Inside, every sound echoed back memories he'd buried. The clatter of a coffee cup, the creak of floorboards, the metallic snap of a door. All of it reminded him of people who no longer existed. He couldn't take them there. Not yet. He pulled a folded army tarp from the back of the truck and carried it to the edge of the clearing. It was old canvas, faded green, the kind that had once kept men alive in deserts and jungles. He tied one corner to a fallen branch and another to a tree, creating a slanted roof between two trunks. The motion came to him like muscle memory, deliberate, precise, the way they had built makeshift covers on missions. The tarp flapped once, caught by wind, and then settled into a soft rattle. He spread his sleeping bag beneath it, placed his flashlight at the corner, and went back to the truck for the dogs. Runa opened her eyes as he leaned in. There was fear in them, yes, but also something else, recognition. She lifted her head weakly when he reached for the pups. The white one let out a faint whine, while the darker one, the bolder of the two, pressed its paws against his forearm, refusing to be left behind. He carried them carefully under his coat, one arm supporting their soft bellies, the other steadying Runa as she tried to stand. She stumbled once before he crouched and lifted her, cradling her weight against his chest. Her fur was heavy with water, smelling of earth and iron. By the time he reached the tarp, his arms ached. He set Runa down on the sleeping bag and dried her fur with an old towel from the truck. The pups crawled over her belly, nudging for warmth. She licked their heads weakly, her tail thumping once. Noah sat beside them, watching, the flashlight glow painting his hands, amber. He realized how foreign this small scene felt. Life moving in rhythm with its own quiet rules. The rain softened further, replaced by the drip of water from branches. In the dim light, everything felt suspended. The breath of the forest, the faint rise and fall of the mother's chest, the sound of two puppies suckling. Noah leaned back against a tree trunk. For years, he had avoided sound. The world had become too loud after the blast, too unpredictable. He had filled his life with absence instead. Yet here, surrounded by breath and rustle and heartbeat, silence felt wrong. It wasn't peace. It was a kind of suffocation. He took a sip from his flask, the liquid burning down his throat. The alcohol didn't help much anymore. It just made the edges blur. A memory slipped in anyway. Mason sitting across from him on the transport plane, laughing about something trivial, the sound so bright that Noah could feel it in his chest. That laugh had been the last real sound he'd heard before the explosion turned everything into ringing metal. Now, years later, that echo had dulled into a whisper that sometimes crawled into his dreams. A low groan broke through the thought. Runa was shifting, her front paw twitching as she tried to stand. Noah reached out and rested a hand on her shoulder. "Easy," he said quietly. Her skin was warm beneath the damp fur. She blinked at him, exhausted but still there. He noticed a small notch in her right ear, the mark of some older fight, perhaps another roadside battle. She was a survivor. He could see that now. He listened for a while, the small, steady sounds of the living filling the void that had once been unbearable. He found himself focusing on them, the rhythmic puff of the pup's breath, the subtle rasp of Runa's lungs, the hum of rain collecting in puddles. These sounds no longer stabbed at him. They stitched something together instead. A twig snapped nearby. Noah turned sharply, flashlight raised. A figure emerged from the mist. An older man wearing a reflective raincoat, a lantern swinging from one hand. His beard was white, thick, unkempt, the sort that grew on someone who didn't care much for mirrors. His name, as Noah would learn later, was Arthur Dale, a retired forest warden who lived alone in a cabin a few miles down the road. Arthur stopped when he saw the dogs. "You hit something?" His voice was gravelly but calm. Noah shook his head. Found them on the road. Must have been hit before I got there. Arthur crouched, eyeing Runa. Tough old girl, he said softly. His eyes were a clear hazel, steady. There's a vet down in the valley, a woman named Helen Brooks. She's kind. Won't ask questions if you bring her strays. Noah nodded, but didn't move. The older man studied him for a moment. His soaked jacket, the mud streaked on his face, the distant look in his eyes. You all right, son? Noah hesitated, just passing through. Arthur gave a small smile, half pity, half understanding. Ain't we all? He turned to leave, his lantern bobbing into the mist. That tarp won't keep you dry all night. Storm's coming back at dawn. When Arthur's footsteps faded, Noah sat back under the tarp. He didn't light the fire. He didn't want to scare the dogs with smoke. The air cooled fast. He wrapped the edge of the tarp tighter and listened. The forest returned to quiet. His body was tired, but his mind wouldn't rest. He realized that what terrified him most wasn't the sound of barking or thunder or rain. It was what came after, the silence that swallowed it all, the void that followed every explosion, every loss. That was the real enemy. He looked at Runa again. Her breathing had steadied. The pups had fallen asleep, tiny bellies rising and falling in sync with hers. He smiled faintly, not at peace yet, but closer. The sky began to pale, faint gray stretching across the horizon. The storm had passed, at least for now. Noah leaned forward, brushing a hand across Runa's head. You're still here, he said softly. The words came easier this time. As dawn crept through the trees, light filtered over the tarp, touching the 3 sleeping bodies. Noah closed his eyes, whispered, I hear you. He wasn't sure if he meant the dogs, the world, or the part of himself he'd tried to silence. But for the first time in years, he didn't need to know the difference. Morning unfolded in quiet layers of light, the kind that didn't announce itself, but simply appeared. Silver mist slipping through the trees, the faint glitter of dew on the tarp. Noah sat near the edge of his small shelter, elbows resting on his knees, staring at the slow-breathing forms beside him. Runa slept soundly for the first time, her ribs moving with a steadier rhythm, muzzle twitching in dreams. The 2 puppies were no longer clinging to her side. They had begun to explore the world in unsteady circles, one bold, one hesitant. The white pup stumbled forward, paws oversized for its small body, its fur still uneven from the night's dampness. It sniffed the air, then turned toward Noah, eyes wide and curious. Its small tail wagged once before it tumbled over a patch of moss, squeaking in surprise. The darker one stayed near Runa, pressing its nose into her neck, then curling back into a protective ball. Noah watched them for a while, the faintest trace of amusement tugging at the corner of his mouth. He hadn't smiled in years. Not really. The motion felt foreign, stretching muscles he'd almost forgotten he had. He reached out, letting the white pup crawl clumsily onto his palm. Hey there, he murmured. The pup looked up at him, head tilted, tiny pink tongue flicking at the air. You're brave, aren't you? It barked softly, the sound high and pure. He laughed under his breath, an exhale, really, but it felt like laughter nonetheless. All right, brave one, you'll be Echo. The name came naturally, without thought, as if it had been waiting. And you, he said, glancing toward the other pup, still nestled against its mother. You're Dust. The golden black pup lifted its head at the sound, eyes darker, slower to blink. It made a small grunt, not quite a bark, as if to say, It had heard, but didn't care to answer. Noah leaned back, resting his head against the tree behind him. "Echo and dust," he said again, and this time he smiled without realizing it. Runa stirred at his voice. She lifted her head, ears twitching, amber eyes half-lidded but aware. The wound on her leg had stopped bleeding, though the fur around it was still matted and raw. She stretched weakly, nudged the darker pup closer, then laid her head back down. The movement was enough to fill Noah with quiet relief. She was still fighting. He poured a small amount of water into a dented metal bowl from his pack and slid it toward her. "Drink," he whispered. She did, slowly, lapping between heavy breaths. The sound of it, gentle, rhythmic, filled the morning stillness. The tarp fluttered once in the wind, a small reminder that the world was still moving beyond this pocket of calm. Noah's eyes followed the tree line, where faint shafts of light broke through fog and touched the wet soil. For years, he'd seen mornings like this as something to endure. Another day survived, another repetition. But now, sitting among fragile creatures that breathed without fear, he noticed details he had forgotten mattered. The texture of bark, the scent of pine, the sound of something small learning to live. He looked at the pups again. Echo had found a leaf and was determined to chew it to pieces. Dust, on the other hand, seemed reluctant to move, watching his sibling with suspicion. The contrast between them felt strangely familiar. One was motion and curiosity, the other hesitation and fear. It struck Noah that maybe these were both reflections of himself, two versions divided by time. Echo, the soldier before the war, fearless and hungry for purpose. Dust, the man who came home afterward, too aware of what could break. He reached down, letting both crawl onto his lap. The warmth of their tiny bodies sank through his cold hands. For a moment, the hum in his damaged ear grew quieter, replaced by the faint scrabble of paws and soft breathing. He closed his eyes, listening. The world wasn't silent anymore, and for the first time, it didn't terrify him. From the distance came the low creak of old branches, the whisper of something approaching. He looked up and saw Arthur Dale again, the forest warden from the night before, walking toward him with a slow, deliberate gait. His yellow raincoat caught what little light there was, making him look like a relic of the mist itself. Arthur smiled when he saw the scene beneath the tarp. "Well, they made it," he said. His voice was rough but warm. Noah nodded. "Barely." Arthur crouched down, knees popping audibly. "You planning to stay up here long?" "I'll move when she can walk." Arthur gave a short hum, studying Runa's wound. "That leg'll heal, but she needs a vet. Helen's still in town. She's got that old clinic off Birch Road, runs it out of her barn." "Arthur," Noah said quietly, "I don't do towns." The older man chuckled. "Then towns will have to do without you. But those dogs won't." Arthur stood, adjusted his lantern strap, and patted Noah's shoulder. "You've got a steady hand, son. Don't waste it." Noah watched him disappear back into the fog, his words lingering longer than the sound of his boots. He sat there, thinking of what steady meant, and how long it had been since anyone had used that word about him. Echo barked again, startling Dust, who squeaked and buried his face against Noah's jacket. Noah laughed, the sound breaking free before he could stop it. "You're opposites, you know that," he said. "One wants to see the world, the other just wants to survive it." He paused, rubbing the back of his neck. "Guess that makes us family." The wind shifted, carrying the scent of wet pine and something cleaner, the faint promise of sunlight. He looked down at the pups again, then toward the faint line of the horizon beyond the trees. "Maybe I don't need silence anymore," he said, the words spilling out before he could think. His voice didn't echo, but the forest seemed to absorb it and return something softer. A breeze stirred the tarp. Runa exhaled, echo barked, dust whimpered, and for once, every sound felt perfectly placed. Noah sat still, listening to all of it. The mountain wasn't silent anymore. Neither was he. The day settled into a calm gray that blurred the horizon. Mist rolled through the trees in long, silent waves. Brushing over the tarp Noah had pitched like a breath against glass. The mountain air smelled of wet earth and pine resin, sharp but clean. Under the makeshift shelter, Runa stirred. Her fur had dried in uneven patches, revealing faint scars beneath the coarse black and tan coat. She shifted slightly, testing her leg. The wound had begun to close, though she still moved with the careful calculation of an animal that expected pain. Noah sat a few feet away, cross-legged, cleaning a dented canteen with a piece of cloth. His jacket hung open, damp at the collar. He looked older than his 42 years. The lines around his mouth deepened by nights without rest. His hands, rough, veined, the hands of a man who had spent half his life gripping steel and rifle triggers, trembled faintly as he worked. He wasn't thinking about anything in particular. The quiet no longer felt like an enemy tonight. It simply existed, like the trees or the cold. Echo was the first to wake. The white pup stretched, yawned with a high-pitched squeak, then toddled toward Noah. Its fur had fluffed back out after drying, soft and uneven, its paws leaving small prints on the tarp. It climbed onto his boot, chewing the lace with fearless determination. Dust, the darker pup, raised his head, but didn't move, watching his sibling from the warmth of Runa's belly. Noah looked at the tiny creature gnawing at his boot. "You're relentless," he murmured. Echo yipped, tail wagging. The sound was small but bright, slicing through the morning stillness. Runa's eyes opened at the noise. She turned her head toward them, ears twitching. Her gaze met Noah's for a brief moment. It wasn't gratitude that he saw there. It was something colder, quieter. Recognition, maybe. She knew him as a presence, not a savior. That was enough. He poured a bit of water into the bowl again and slid it toward her. She drank slowly, each movement deliberate. Her tongue rasped against metal. Noah waited until she finished, then took the bowl back and poured the last of his canteen into it for the pups. He leaned back, exhaling. For years, he'd told himself that saving people was what broke him, that every life he failed to pull out of the fire was another nail driven into whatever was left of his soul. But now, as he watched Runa lower her head again, he understood something quieter. Not everything you save has to thank you. And maybe it wasn't about being needed. Maybe it was about staying long enough to listen to something that wasn't your own guilt. The sky darkened sooner than expected. Heavy clouds gathered, swelling over the ridge like bruises. The wind shifted, colder, carrying the scent of incoming rain. Noah pulled the tarp lower, tying it tighter to the branches. The pups whined at the sudden gust. Runa raised her head, watching him work. When the first drops fell, they were soft, almost gentle. Then, within minutes, the mountain was alive with sound. Rain drummed against the tarp, against leaves, against the truck parked nearby. Water slid down the tree trunks in silver streaks. Noah sat under the shelter, knees drawn up, watching the storm erase the outlines of the world He used to hate this sound. Rain had always been too close to the roar of chaos, too similar to the noise that tore through his eardrum in that Afghan valley years ago. It carried that same unrelenting rhythm, that same reminder of powerlessness. But tonight, it was different. Maybe because there were others breathing beside him. Maybe because the rain fell not as an attack, but as cleansing. It hit the ground softly, washing away the dried blood that had clung to his boots and the faint red stain that still darkened the tarp's edge. Echo barked once, startled by the thunder. Noah reached out instinctively, letting the pup press against his leg. Dust followed, climbing onto Runa's back, hiding beneath the loose flap of Noah's jacket. The heat from their bodies spread slowly, pushing back the chill. Runa watched, silent, her expression unreadable. The rain traced lines along her fur. She blinked once, then laid her head down again, her breathing steady and deep. Noah found himself matching that rhythm without meaning to. Inhale, exhale. 3 heartbeats, 3 lives. Fragile, present, real. He tilted his head upward. The rain touched his face, cool and clean. The sound surrounded him completely. A steady, layered hum of water, wind, and breath. He listened carefully, searching for the sharp edge that used to make him flinch. It wasn't there. The noise didn't hurt anymore. A flash of lightning lit the forest in pale blue for an instant, revealing every drop hanging midair. Then darkness swallowed it back. Thunder rolled through the valley, low and slow. Echo whimpered again. Noah whispered, "It's just the sky talking," his voice barely audible over the storm. He wasn't sure why he said it. Maybe because he needed to hear himself say something that wasn't an order or an apology. The words sounded strange in his throat, rough, but real. He stayed awake long after the rain softened into drizzle. The air grew thick with mist again, and every breath left faint clouds in the cold. Runa's fur steamed lightly, drying in the warmth of the pups pressed against her. Noah leaned back against the tree trunk, arms crossed. His muscles ached, but he didn't mind. Pain was part of being alive. He thought of Mason again, his friend's voice over the radio, the one that used to echo inside the quiet when the nightmares came. For years, that voice had sounded like accusation. Tonight, it was something else. Mason had once told him, "Silence isn't peace. It's just what's left after you give up." Noah had never understood it until now. The forest settled back into calm. The last drops of rain slipped from the leaves in soft, rhythmic patterns. Echo and Dust were asleep again, small bodies twitching as they dreamed. Runa's breathing was deeper now, her tail occasionally brushing the tarp. Noah listened to all of it, the chorus of small sounds that filled the night. 3 breaths, steady, blending into one rhythm. He counted them without thinking. 1 for Runa, 1 for Echo, 1 for Dust, and 1, though he didn't realize it until later, for himself. He smiled faintly, eyes half closed. "Not bad," he whispered. His own breathing joined theirs, slow and even. Outside, the last traces of the storm vanished into fog, leaving behind only the scent of wet pine and soil. The mountain exhaled, and for once, Noah exhaled with it. A week passed quietly in the mountains. The snow that had once threatened the ridges had melted into streams that trickled through pine roots, carving new lines into the mud. The forest smelled of wet bark and beginnings. Noah sat by the side of the narrow asphalt road where it curved toward the valley, his truck parked a few feet away, engine silent, windows open to the wind. Runa lay near his boots, her body stronger now, her fur almost dry and full again, the wound on her leg healing into a thin, pale scar. Echo and Dust played nearby, chasing the last fallen pine cones across the gravel shoulder, their movements uneven and full of clumsy joy. The morning sun filtered through the trees in thin bands. Noah's eyes followed the play of light, but his thoughts drifted elsewhere. Not forward, not back, but somewhere between. The hum in his damaged ear had grown weaker over the last few days. Now, his left side was almost entirely silent. It should have worried him, but it didn't. There was something strangely peaceful about that emptiness. He picked up a flat piece of bark, running his thumb along its edge. Runa lifted her head to watch him. "You're looking better," he said quietly. She blinked once, her tail thumping once against the ground, then returned her gaze to the forest as if keeping guard. From a distance came the low hum of an approaching vehicle, the sound breaking the mountain's calm like a ripple through still water. Noah turned his head, narrowing his eyes. A white utility truck appeared around the bend, its tires crackling over pebbles. It slowed as it neared, and the driver rolled down the window. "Morning," a voice called. Noah stood, brushing his hands on his jeans. The man who stepped out was tall and lean, mid-50s, with a sunburnt face and a wiry mustache. His jacket bore the seal of the local forestry department. His name tag read, D. Whitaker. He had that cautious kindness of people used to strangers in remote places. "You the one folks been talking about?" Whitaker asked. "Man with the dogs up near Ridge Point?" Noah gave a half smile. "Guess so." Whitaker's gaze dropped to Runa and the pups. "Well, I'll be damned. Thought they were gone when we passed last week. You've been camping out here all this time?" "Just making sure they could stand before I move on." The ranger nodded, stepping closer. "You've done a good thing. Town's been keeping an eye out. There's a rescue center in Red Hollow. They could take them off your hands, make sure they get the care they need." Noah didn't answer right away. He crouched beside Runa, resting a hand on her shoulder. The German shepherd looked up at him, calm, steady. Echo ran between his knees, yipping, while Dust watched from behind Runa's leg, eyes cautious but curious. Noah's voice, when it came, was soft but certain. "They're not going anywhere." Whitaker raised an eyebrow. "You plan to keep all three?" Noah nodded once. "They already saved me once." The ranger tilted his head, studying him. There was something in Noah's tone, a mix of weariness and conviction that didn't invite argument. Whitaker smiled faintly, hands on his hips. "Well, I guess that's fair. Still, if you ever need supplies, Helen Brooks runs the vet clinic down in the valley. Good woman. Used to patch up my old retriever every spring." "Helen," Noah repeated. "Arthur mentioned her." "Then you've met the old man," Whitaker said with a laugh. "He's a fixture up here. You get lost, you find Arthur." The two men stood for a moment, watching the pups tumble in the dust. The forest was alive with sound again. Birds, wind, the far-off rush of water. Whitaker's radio crackled from his truck, breaking the spell. "Well," he said, stepping back, "I'll let you get on with it. Good luck out here." Noah gave a small nod of thanks. The ranger climbed back into his vehicle, waved, and disappeared down the road. The noise of the engine faded until it was swallowed completely by the hills. Noah stayed where he was, listening. Or rather, not listening. The silence in his left ear had become complete by now. No ringing, no feedback, nothing. It was strange how final it felt, as if the world had simply decided to leave one side of him untouched. He ran a hand along the side of his face, half smiling. "Maybe silence is a language too," he said under his breath. Runa shifted closer, pressing her head gently against his leg. Her eyes were calmer now, less guarded, more knowing. Echo climbed onto his lap, paws muddy, tail wagging furiously. Dust hesitated a moment, then followed, curling against his other knee. The warmth of them all pressed into him like sunlight. He looked toward the road leading down to the valley. Somewhere beyond the trees lay the small cabin he had once called home, though it had never really felt like one. It was little more than a shell. 4 walls, an old porch, a broken swing. He hadn't been back since the winter mason died. But now, for reasons he couldn't name, it didn't seem so heavy anymore. When they finally reached it, the cabin looked smaller than he remembered. The paint had peeled from the siding, and ivy crawled up the posts. Inside, dust motes danced in the filtered light. He opened the windows, let the air move through, the sound of the outside world. Birds, creaking trees, a distant stream, filled the space that had once been only echoes of memory. He found an old wooden sign in the corner of the porch, a leftover from his SEAL training days. The letters were faded, almost gone. He turned it over, then fetched a piece of charcoal from the stove. Slowly, he wrote in uneven strokes, "Listen first." He nailed the sign beside the door. That night, he sat on the porch as the sun disappeared behind the ridge. Echo and Dust slept at his feet. Runa dozed near the steps, ears twitching at every distant sound. The world settled into a quiet that was no longer empty. It was filled with breathing, rustling, heartbeat, all the small noises that meant life continued, stubborn and soft. Noah tilted his head, catching what he could with the ear that still worked. He smiled faintly. "Guess that's enough." He leaned back, eyes half closed, listening to what silence left behind, and realizing it was everything he needed to hear. The clouds had returned, low and full, pressing down on the valley until the whole world smelled like iron and wet pine. Rain came in steady lines across the windshield, each drop breaking apart as it met the glass. The wipers moved slowly, almost reluctant to interrupt the rhythm. Noah sat behind the wheel, his hands loose on the steering wheel, the hum of the engine soft beneath the storm. Runa sat in the passenger seat, her head near the half-open window, eyes calm, ears flicking at every sound. In the back, Echo and Dust took turns pressing their noses to the fogged glass, watching the blur of forest slide by. It had been months since that night on this same mountain road. The season had shifted, but the feeling was the same. That quiet heaviness that came when the world was both alive and grieving. The asphalt glistened, the rain turning every patch of dirt into glass. Noah knew this road too well now. Every bend still carried the echo of headlights cutting through mist. Every dip in the shoulder remembered the shape of something broken. He didn't come back for closure. He didn't even believe in that word anymore. He came because sometimes you have to return to the place that hurt you just to see if it still can. He slowed the truck as he reached the curve, the one where he had first found Runa and the 2 pups. The forest around it had grown wilder, weeds rising through cracks in the old guardrail. There was no sign of that night, no blood, no paw prints, no trace that life or loss had ever happened there. Just rain, washing everything clean. Noah pulled to the side of the road and cut the engine. The sudden absence of sound made the rain louder. He opened the driver's door. The air outside was cold, clean, full of the deep hum of water hitting earth. Runa jumped out first, landing lightly despite the scar on her leg. Her fur had thickened again. Her stride carried a quiet authority now. Echo bounded after her, white fur flashing against the dark mud, barking once at the sky as if daring it to respond. Dust followed slower, tail low, his steps careful. The rain darkened his golden black coat, flattening his fur until he looked smaller than he was. Noah stepped out last. The rain struck his face and shoulders, running down his collar. He closed his eyes, tilted his head upward, and let it soak him. The sound of the storm wasn't chaos anymore. It was layered. Water against metal, against leaves, against skin. He listened the way a man listens when he's finally ready to hear what silence has been hiding. He walked to the edge of the road where the ditch met the woods. The air was thicker here, filled with the scent of moss and memory. He could almost picture it again. The beam of the flashlight, the trembling pups, the weak rise and fall of a mother's chest. He could almost feel the ache in his knees from that night when he'd knelt in the rain and made a choice he didn't understand yet. Behind him, Runa barked once, sharp and clear. Echo answered her immediately, voice higher, lighter. Dust only looked up, watching the others before turning his gaze back toward Noah. He smiled faintly. "Go on," he said, his voice rough but steady. "Go see what's yours." The dogs ran, paws kicking up mud and water. They moved like they remembered something ancient, the freedom of sound, the wildness of breath. Runa stayed close to the trees, her body cutting through the grass in quiet grace. Echo darted in circles, chasing nothing but joy. Dust followed slower, but never stopped. Noah leaned against the truck, hands deep in his pockets, watching them. The rain began to fall harder, blurring the outlines of everything: forest, road, sky. There was no horizon anymore, just the sound of life moving through water. He could hear it all: Runa's steady breath, Echo's uneven barks, the soft splash of Dust's paws against puddles. Underneath it, his own heartbeat, faint but certain. He had spent years trying to silence every noise inside him: the guilt, the memory, the hum in his broken ear. But now, in this rain, the noise had become something else. It wasn't punishment anymore. It was proof that he was still here. He opened the truck door and took out his old field jacket. It still bore the faded navy patch on one shoulder, the one Mason had stitched back on years ago during deployment. He slipped it on, the weight familiar. The rain soaked through quickly, but he didn't mind. He pressed his palm against the patch, whispering, "Still hear you, brother." The words disappeared into the storm. He climbed back into the truck, but didn't start it yet. Through the open window, the smell of rain filled the cab, earthy, metallic, alive. He listened. The rain drummed on the roof. Echo barked in the distance. Dust growled playfully, and Runa's deeper tone cut through it all like a metronome keeping time. He closed his eyes. Inside the silence of his left ear, he could still sense the rhythm, a phantom echo that matched the rain's pulse. It was strange, almost holy, how even emptiness could keep beat. For a long moment, he let himself breathe with them, the three of them and the rain. The world outside and the world inside finally aligned. When the pups came back, soaked and panting, Runa followed behind, her tail wagging once before she shook herself dry beside the truck. Noah opened the door, letting them climb in, one after another. Echo jumped first, tail slapping his leg. Dust hesitated, then followed, curling near Runa's feet. Noah looked out at the road one last time. The rain was relentless now, hitting the surface in silver bursts, filling the ditches, erasing every old scar the asphalt once carried. He smiled, faint and quiet. "Maybe forgiveness isn't quiet after all," he said. His voice blended into the rain, almost lost, but not quite. He started the engine, the soft rumble rising beneath the storm. The headlights cut a pale path through the downpour as the truck moved forward. Behind him, the road disappeared into water and mist, leaving only the sound of rain. Steady, endless, and somehow kind. If someone had been standing there on the mountain that night, they might have sworn they heard something else beneath the storm. Not thunder, not wind, but a faint human sound, like someone was smiling through the rain. Sometimes, God doesn't speak through miracles that split the sky or voices that shake the earth. Sometimes, He whispers through small things. A cry in the rain, a breath that won't stop, a soul learning to listen again. Noah thought he was saving 3 lives that night on the mountain, but perhaps it was God saving his, reminding him and us that even in the quiet, His presence is never gone. In our everyday lives, it's easy to forget that grace can arrive in ordinary ways, through kindness, through the sound of forgiveness, through something as simple as hearing someone breathe beside you. Maybe that's where God hides His greatest miracles, not in what we see, but in what we hear when we finally stop running from silence. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a reminder that hope still speaks, softly, but always. Leave a comment with where you're watching from. Subscribe for more stories of faith and second chances, and may God bless you and every life you choose to listen to.